He had seen every kind of performance imaginable, but when she walked onto that stage in white silk, Simon Cowell realized he was about to witness something that would redefine everything he thought he knew about love. The America's Got Talent theater pulsed with its usual pre-show energy, but tonight felt different somehow. The production crew moved with their practiced efficiency, cameras positioned perfectly, audience settling into their seats with the kind of excited anticipation that came with live television. Simon sat at the judge's table in his customary position, arms crossed, pen poised over the red buzzer, his sharp gaze scanning the stage with the calculating assessment of someone who had judged thousands of hopeful performers. The evening had proceeded normally so far. A magician who mystified the audience, a dance troupe that earned standing ovations, a comedian whose timing was impeccable. Standard Tuesday night auditions, the kind of routine talent evaluation that had become second nature to Simon over his years behind the judge's desk. But backstage, something extraordinary was about to unfold. In the wings stood a figure that would challenge every assumption Simon had made about performance, about grief, and about the ways love persists beyond the boundaries of life itself. Her name was Isabella Chen, 24 years old, and she was wearing the most beautiful wedding dress anyone in that theater would ever see. It was ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves, a flowing train that caught the backstage lights like captured moonlight, and a bodice embroidered with tiny pearls that had taken her grandmother 6 months to sew by hand. The dress had been altered 3 times to achieve perfect fit, pressed with meticulous care, and preserved in tissue paper for 8 months. It was the dress she was supposed to wear 3 weeks ago on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Instead, 3 weeks ago, Isabella had worn black to a funeral. She had stood beside a casket, holding the man who was supposed to meet her at the altar, who was supposed to dance with her to their song, who was supposed to grow old with her through decades of ordinary Tuesday nights and extraordinary celebrations. In her delicate hands, Isabella clutched a piece of sheet music, the edges worn from countless readings. It was the song Marcus had written for their first dance, the melody he had hummed while he proposed, the music he had been planning to surprise her with during their ceremony. She had discovered it in his guitar case 2 days after the accident, tucked between chord charts and grocery lists, with a note in his handwriting, "For Izzy, my forever dance partner." Marcus Rivera had been 26 years old, an elementary school music teacher who wrote songs in his spare time and believed that every child deserved to discover their own musical voice. He had died on a Tuesday afternoon, not dramatically or poetically, but in the most mundane way possible. A drunk driver running a red light while Marcus was walking to the flower shop to finalize their wedding bouquet. The last conversation they had was about centerpieces. The last text Marcus sent was a photo of daisies with the message, "These remind me of your smile." The last song he hummed was the melody Isabella was about to perform for an audience who had no idea they were about to become witnesses to the most sacred kind of performance. Isabella had not sung since the funeral. For 3 weeks, she had sat in their shared apartment, surrounded by wedding gifts they would never use and thank you cards she would never send, listening to Marcus's voice on old voicemails and trying to understand how someone could simply disappear from the world without warning. Her friends had suggested therapy. Her family had recommended grief counseling. Her mother had gently suggested that maybe it was time to pack away the wedding dress, but Isabella had a different plan, one that had crystallized during a sleepless night when she found herself humming Marcus's melody and realizing that some songs are too important to remain unheard. She was going to sing their wedding song on the stage where dreams came true, wearing the dress that would never walk down an aisle, performing for the man who would never hear her voice again, but somehow still deserved to know that their love story, however brief, had been worth celebrating. The stage manager approached her in the wings. "Miss Chen, you're up next." Isabella nodded, smoothing the silk skirt of her dress and checking the sheet music one final time. She had practiced this moment in her bedroom mirror, in her car during lunch breaks, in the shower when she thought no one could hear her crying between verses. But standing here in the wings of America's Got Talent, she realized that no amount of preparation could ready someone for the moment when private grief becomes public art. "Are you ready?" the stage manager asked gently, perhaps sensing the gravity of what she was about to do. Isabella looked down at her wedding dress, thought of Marcus's voice humming their melody, and nodded. She walked onto the stage. The audience's reaction was immediate and visceral, a collective intake of breath, whispers of confusion and curiosity, camera phones lifting to capture the surreal image of a bride on a talent show stage. Isabella looked ethereal under the bright lights, like something from a dream or a fairy tale. But there was something in her posture that suggested this was no fantasy. Simon leaned forward, his interest immediately piqued. In 15 years of judging, he had never seen a contestant in a wedding dress. His initial assumption was performance art or perhaps some kind of tribute act, but something about the way Isabella carried herself, the careful reverence with which she held her sheet music, suggested this was something deeper. "Hello," Simon said, his voice carrying clearly across the theater. "What's your name?" "Isabella Chen." Her voice was steady but soft, carrying just the slightest tremor that spoke of carefully controlled emotion. "And Isabella, I have to ask the obvious question. What's with the wedding dress?" The audience chuckled softly, expecting a light-hearted explanation. Perhaps she was getting married later that week, or maybe this was part of her act. But when Isabella looked directly at Simon, her expression serious and heartbreakingly sincere, the laughter faded. "I was supposed to get married 3 weeks ago," she said simply. "But my fiancé died in a car accident 4 days before our wedding." The silence that followed was immediate and complete. Even the production crew seemed to freeze. Simon felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that this audition was about to become something far more significant than entertainment. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Simon said quietly, his voice gentler than anyone in the audience had heard it before. Isabella nodded, holding up the sheet music in her hands. "Marcus wrote this song for our first dance. I found it after he died, and I realized that some songs are too beautiful to never be heard. Some promises are too important to leave unfinished." One of the other judges leaned into their microphone. "And you want to perform it here, tonight?" "I want to dance with him one more time," Isabella said, her voice breaking slightly on the words. "I know he's not here, but this song is, and maybe if I sing it somewhere beautiful, somewhere important, he'll hear it somehow." Simon had heard thousands of stories over his years as a judge. Sob stories, manipulation attempts, genuine tragedies, and everything in between. But there was something about Isabella's simple honesty, the way she stood in that wedding dress like a ghost, from a celebration that never happened, that cut through every professional defense he had ever constructed. "What's the song called?" Simon asked. "Forever Dance," Isabella replied. "Marcus always said that even when we were old and gray, even when we couldn't remember our own names, we would still remember how to dance together." The metaphor hit Simon with unexpected force. He thought of his own relationships, the promises made and broken, the certainty that love would last forever, followed by the reality that nothing truly does. But here was a woman in a wedding dress, preparing to keep a promise to someone who would never know she had kept it. "Whenever you're ready," Simon said, his voice rougher than usual. Isabella closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Her voice was pure and untrained, carrying the weight of 3 weeks of grief and 24 years of learning how to love completely. The melody was simple but haunting, the kind of song that sounded like it had always existed, like it had been waiting in the universe for Marcus to discover it and give it form. "We'll dance forever, you and me, through all the years we'll never see. When the music stops playing, when the lights go down, I'll still hear you. I'll still feel you spinning me around." The audience was completely still. Not a sound, not a movement. Just Isabella's voice filling the theater with the most intimate kind of sorrow, transformed into beauty. As she sang, Isabella began to move. Not choreographed dance, but the natural sway of someone remembering how it felt to be held, to move in perfect rhythm with another person. Her eyes remained closed, and for those watching, it almost seemed like she was dancing with an invisible partner. "We'll dance forever, hand in hand, even in this lonesome land." Though I can't see you, though I can't touch your face, I still feel you in this empty space." Simon felt his throat tighten. This wasn't performance, this was ritual. This was a woman keeping the most sacred kind of promise, honoring love that transcended physical presence. He thought of all the wedding dances he had witnessed over the years, all the couples who took for granted that they would have decades of music ahead of them. As Isabella reached the bridge of the song, something unprecedented happened. Simon stood up from the judges' table. The other judges looked at him in confusion. The audience murmured, but Simon barely noticed any of it. He was watching Isabella in her wedding dress, singing to someone who wasn't there, and he understood that he was witnessing something too sacred to remain seated for. Isabella continued singing, her voice growing stronger with each verse, as if Marcus's melody was giving her permission to grieve publicly, beautifully, completely. "And when my last song's over, when my final dance is through, I'll waltz into forever, and I'll finally dance with you." As the final note faded into silence, Isabella opened her eyes and looked directly at the empty space beside her on stage. For a moment, she stood there in her wedding dress, arms positioned as if she were still being held, still dancing with the love of her life. Then she curtsied to the empty air, a formal end to the dance that had never happened, and turned to face the judges. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Simon did something that had never occurred in the show's history. He walked around the judges' table, climbed onto the stage, and approached Isabella. The audience gasped. Production assistants whispered frantically into their headsets. But Simon ignored all of it. He walked to the spot where Isabella had been singing and stopped in front of her. "Isabella," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "may I ask you something?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but her posture still holding the dignity of a bride. "If Marcus could see you right now, singing his song in your wedding dress, what do you think he would say?" Isabella considered the question seriously, looking down at her dress and then back at Simon. "He would say that I look beautiful," she said softly, "and he would ask me to save him the next dance." Simon's composure cracked completely. This woman had just performed the most heartbreaking audition in the show's history, and she was still thinking about saving dances for someone who would never dance again. "Isabella," Simon said, "I want you to know something. What you just did wasn't just singing. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen on this stage." He turned to address the entire theater. "This young woman just showed us what love looks like when it has nowhere to go except into art. She kept a promise to someone who will never know she kept it. She honored a relationship that ended too soon by refusing to let the beauty they created together disappear." Simon turned back to Isabella. "You asked if Marcus could hear you. I don't know about that, but I know that everyone in this theater heard him through you. We heard his music, his love, his belief that some bonds are strong enough to survive anything." Isabella was crying openly now, but they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of gratitude, that someone understood what she had been trying to do. Then, Simon did something that surprised even himself. He offered Isabella his arm, the way Marcus would have at their wedding ceremony. "Would you honor me with one more dance?" he asked quietly. Isabella looked at him with surprise and gratitude, then placed her hand on his arm. Simon led her to the center of the stage, positioned himself as if for a slow dance, and nodded to the sound booth. The opening notes of "Forever Dance" began to play softly through the theater speakers. Simon had never heard the song before that night, but he moved carefully, respectfully, allowing Isabella to lead them through the simple steps of the dance she had choreographed in her imagination with Marcus. The audience was completely silent, witnessing something that transcended entertainment and became pure human connection. Here was one of the most famous judges in television, dancing with a grieving bride in her wedding dress, helping her complete the ceremony that would never be. As the song ended, Simon and Isabella stood still for a moment. Then he stepped back and bowed formally, the way a groom might bow to his bride after their first dance. "Thank you for letting us be part of your wedding day," he said simply. Isabella curtsied in return, then looked at the judges' table. "I don't need to win," she said, her voice carrying clearly through her tears. "I just needed to dance with him one more time. And somehow, I did." Simon walked back to the judges' table, but before sitting down, he pointed to the golden buzzer. "Hit it," he said simply. Golden confetti exploded throughout the theater as the audience erupted in applause. But Isabella barely noticed the celebration around her. She was looking at the empty space where she had imagined Marcus standing. And, for the first time in 3 weeks, she was smiling. After the cameras stopped rolling, Isabella sat in the green room, carefully arranging the train of her wedding dress and holding the sheet music Marcus had written. Simon knocked on the door and entered without waiting for permission. "Isabella," he said, sitting down across from her, "I wanted to tell you something." She looked up at him. This powerful man who had shown such unexpected kindness. "What you did tonight," Simon continued, "that wasn't just about honoring Marcus. That was about showing the world that love doesn't end when life does, that the most important promises aren't the ones we make in front of witnesses, but the ones we keep in private, in our hearts." Isabella listened, holding Marcus's song against her chest. "You know," Simon said, "I've been to hundreds of weddings in my life, but tonight was the first time I truly understood what 'till death do us part' really means. It doesn't mean love ends with death. It means love becomes something different, something that exists in memory and music and moments like this." Isabella smiled through her tears. "Marcus always said that love was like music. Even when the song ends, the melody stays with you forever." Simon nodded, understanding something profound about the nature of loss and the courage it takes to keep loving someone you can't hold anymore. 3 weeks later, the episode aired. Isabella's performance became the most watched audition in America's Got Talent history. But more importantly, it started conversations about love, loss, and the ways we honor relationships that end too soon. Funeral homes began offering celebration of love services for couples who lost each other before their weddings. Wedding planners started creating memorial tributes for ceremonies that honored deceased loved ones. Musicians began performing Forever Dance at services for couples separated by death rather than divorce. Isabella received thousands of letters from people around the world who had lost partners, fiancés, spouses, and lovers. People who had felt alone in their grief suddenly found community in her courage to love publicly, completely, without guarantee of return. 6 months after her audition, Isabella established the Marcus Rivera Music Foundation, providing instruments and lessons to children whose families couldn't afford music education. The foundation's motto, taken from Marcus's last note to her, was simple: everyone deserves to discover their own musical voice. Simon stayed in touch with Isabella, not as a judge or celebrity, but as someone who had been profoundly changed by witnessing her grief transformed into art. He began incorporating Marcus's philosophy into his own life, looking for the melody in difficult moments, finding rhythm in unexpected places. The wedding dress was eventually donated to a program that provided formal wear for low-income brides, but not before Isabella wore it one more time to the foundation's first fundraiser, where she performed Forever Dance for an audience of music teachers, grieving partners, and people who understood that some promises are too important to leave unfulfilled. Marcus's song took on a life of its own, performed by musicians around the world who understood its power to transform private grief into shared healing. It became an unofficial anthem for anyone who had loved someone they couldn't keep, a reminder that the deepest connections transcend physical presence. Isabella eventually remarried 5 years later to a music therapist who had attended that first foundation fundraiser, but she still performed Forever Dance every year on what would have been her and Marcus's anniversary, keeping alive the melody of their love while building new songs with someone who understood that her heart was large enough to hold both past and present. The empty space on the AGT stage where Isabella had danced alone became something of a legend among the production crew. They began referring to it as Marcus's spot, and whenever they had performances about love or loss, they would mentally dedicate that space to relationships that existed more in memory than reality. Simon learned something that night that changed how he approached every relationship afterward, that the most beautiful love stories aren't always the ones with happy endings. Sometimes they're the ones where someone loves so completely that they're willing to dance alone in a wedding dress, singing to an empty theater, keeping promises to people who can't promise them anything in return. The wedding that never happened became a ceremony that touched millions of hearts. The dance that was never danced became a performance that reminded everyone watching that love, once given completely, never truly ends. It just finds new stages, new audiences, new ways to express itself. And in a television studio in Los Angeles, where entertainment usually meant escape from reality, one woman's wedding dress became a reminder that the most powerful performances come not from hiding our pain, but from transforming it into something beautiful enough to share with strangers who become witnesses to the eternal nature of love itself. It wasn't just television that night, it was a wedding ceremony for a love that transcended death, officiated by a judge who understood that some promises are sacred enough to keep forever, and attended by an audience who learned that the most important dances are sometimes the ones we dance alone, in memory of partners who taught us that love never really ends. It just changes tempo, finds new rhythm, and keeps playing long after the music stops.